SEC power rankings. Caleb has them for you right now. I will tell you whether or not I disagree with the power rankings. If I agree, they get a hey now. If not, that's crazy. And if Caleb's way off base,
you suck. Yes,
all right, Caleb, get us started with the first, let's say, bottom half dozen.
All right, well, there's really only two clear-cut bottom teams at this point, and it is, and I switched them this time. Congratulations, Auburn. You have the distinction of being the worst team in the SEC and surpassing Mississippi State, and the reason is Mississippi State played Georgia tougher than Auburn did.
Hey now, got no problem.
Yep, so Mississippi State's number 15. Number 14, I dropped Kentucky all the way down to number 14. Losing at home to Ole Miss like that. There's still that blowout over South Carolina. I'm not Ole Miss, excuse me. Losing at home to Vanderbilt like that. There's still that blowout over South Carolina. I know they have the win over Ole Miss. That win, I think, is going to go down as one of the flukier wins of college football this year.
I don't think it's fluky. I thought they had a good system in place that's going to give Tennessee some problems defensively. I think they're one of the teams that has figured out that 3-down look. Hey now. All right, but anyway, next two.
All right.
Now, I will say this. I think after Ole Miss lost to LSU, they could unravel, and that could look like a less of a victory. But I think that Kentucky showed LSU and other teams how to beat Ole Miss. All right.
All right. So moving on to number 13. I know they just lost on the road in overtime, but I still have Florida down at number 13. I can't move them up too much. I mean, largely because you know that if it comes down to it, Billy Napier is going to coach away a win.
Yes. Yes, Mr. Napier. Your room is the 5th on the right. The lady in the nursing home said as Billy Napier walks around lost. All right. Who's next, Caleb?
Number 12 is Arkansas. They didn't play this past week, so they had to drop because some other teams moved up, but Arkansas is number 12 right now.
Okay. Keep rolling.
Number 11 is South Carolina. I get everybody's excited that they played Alabama close. Game was at Alabama. Should have been more of a blowout, but I think there were, again, I picked that South Carolina to keep it close. I think there was a lot of things going on right there.
That's crazy.
I'll pick South Carolina. I think South Carolina is a little high, a little higher than what you have them. But let me see who you got next to have them against.
Well, that's because Dave is a big fan of Shane Beamer, guys. He thinks Shane Beamer is just going to be one of the greatest coaches of all time.
Monstrous.
Okay, so after South Carolina, I'm going to Vanderbilt at number 10. I know people think Vanderbilt should be higher, but even with these two wins, I do think it's part of a trend. But Dave, I can't sit there and say that I think Vanderbilt's ever going to be like a top half of the SEC. That's it. I'm sorry, that's just not serious at that point.
I disagree. I think NIL and transfer portal changes things, and I think that you will say within the next 2 years that Vanderbilt's top half of the SEC. Which I know from Dave sounds...
That's crazy.
But that's where I stand. All right, who's next, Caleb?
So in the future power conference, Dave thinks Vanderbilt should come then. He thinks they belong now. He's changed.
Now I do. They've done enough to get in just in time. They basically did extra credit to make it into the mega conference right before the end of the semester.
They're the academic school. They know what it takes to stay in the power conferences. And they're like, oh, we got to get in this, so let's be good now. We didn't have to before. And
let me just tell you that my cousin is an orthopedic surgeon that puts in hips and knees, and he went to Vanderbilt. And there are a lot of people like him that if they wanted to change the NIL face of that program, trust me, they could. I mean, it would be a drop in the bucket for my cousin.
The difference.
Thank you for the new hip.
Before we move on, the difference in NIL, and it's funny you talk about that because it's not so much the big boosters, because every team has the big boosters. It's how many of those upper middle class people do you have who graduated from your school that are willing to throw in some money? And I mean upper middle class, I mean like 400,000 to $1 million range. You know what I mean? Like that could throw in some money, and that can make the big difference if you got a lot of those. And Vanderbilt has a lot.
Dr. Thomas could afford that. Who's next?
Moving on to number 9 is Missouri. I mean, I know they were a fraudulent undefeated team, but they absolutely blew out UMass. I know UMass is the worst team in FBS, but I still have Missouri over Vanderbilt.
Sorry, neutral site. Vanderbilt beats Missouri.
Look at Dave. All right. Well, number 8 is number 8. I've got Oklahoma. I get they got blown out by Texas. They got quarterback issues, but they're still 4-2. They still have that win over Auburn. And I mean, I don't know. I still think I favor Oklahoma over Vanderbilt, but you can tell me if I'm wrong.
That's crazy.
Neutral site. That's a pick 'em against Vanderbilt.
Good Lord, Dave. Wow. Wow.
Good Lord.
All right.
All right.
Number 7, and I had to drop them. I got Tennessee down at number 7 now. You play Florida at home, a bad Florida team, and you need overtime to beat them. Not only do you need overtime to beat them, you need, as we just talked about, the most mismanaged game in history by Billy Napier to beat them. And so they're only number 7.
It feels like they should be higher, but let me see who's ahead of them.
Well, number 6, you could say they're going to unravel, but I have Ole Miss at number 6. I think losing on the road to LSU in overtime is more impressive than beating Florida at home in overtime.
Would you take Tennessee or Ole Miss at a neutral site?
Right now, I think Ole Miss would be favored. I favor Ole Miss. Now, I might take Tennessee myself, but if I'm Vegas, I'm setting the line in favor of Ole Miss.
I would take Tennessee because I think they figured out to make things easier on Nico, and he's not completely ready. I think that if you look back in the Oklahoma and Arkansas game, they put too much on him. What's next?
All right. So number 5 is Alabama. I know they just won ugly, but I mean, again, I said that would happen. They're still figuring out their defense. And look, they have some issues with Jalen Miller, who is, I think I was proven right, not a fit for Kalen DeBoer's offense. But I think they're working around it right now, and they still only have one loss, and they still beat Georgia.
All right. Got no argument with that. Who's next?
Number 4, they didn't play this week, but Texas A&M, they still only have one loss, and I bet if they played Notre Dame right now, they'd win.
Hey now.
I agree with that last part, but that seems a little high for A&M. Who's next?
Number 3 is Georgia. Again, all these teams are struggling. None of these teams are have a lot to celebrate, but Georgia, I think, does. I think Georgia's still number 3. I mean, again, neutral field, even that seems a little low, doesn't it? Because I think in neutral field, you still might favor them over everybody but Texas.
Yeah, I don't want to push them too far down the list like Kirby Smart likes to do. All right, who's next?
Well played, my friend. Number 2, and yes, the Caleb Calhoun LSU homerism is back, but I got LSU at number 2, guys. I'm sorry that win over Ole Miss has to matter, and they only have one loss, and it's from the opener. Then Garrett Nussmeier is getting more dangerous by the day.
Garrett Nussmeier is a very good quarterback, and I would watch out for him. I like his upside a lot, and he's healthy. I think that makes them a better football team. All right, what do you got next?
And number 1, I mean, is anybody going to debate Texas at number 1 right now? That's not even that's not a hard. This was a hard power rankings to do, but Texas at number 1 is the most obvious thing in the history of the world to do for the SEC right now.
You know, it's funny. I wrote how every team has their issues, and Texas does. But Texas's issue is they don't know which great quarterback to play.
I think they know now. I think they know.
That's a pretty. If that is your issue, I mean, Tennessee's got offensive tackle issues. We're going to talk to Clint Lamb here in a second about. I don't think that Alabama's a perfect team. Maybe still quarterback issues. He works with the Next Round Live. I think every team in the SEC has issues, but Texas is choosing between 2 great quarterbacks.
Quinn Ewers is more experienced at this point. Arch Manning made some mistakes on the field when he started. So there's a little bit of Nico in Arch Manning right now. And what I mean by that is his youth shows.
I'm not arguing that, but if they had to go with Arch Manning, they'd still be number 1 on your list, right?
Yeah, they still would be number 1 on my list, probably.
It's pretty scary. It's pretty scary.